Captain Amanda Hayes stood at parade rest on the bridge of the UES Tenacity, maintaining her composure as 3 Centaurian delegates whispered among themselves, their crystalline appendages catching the starlight. Their translucent bodies shimmered with barely contained amusement as they studied the ship's manual control stations. "Fascinating," the lead delegate said, mandibles clicking. "You still use physical interfaces for navigation. How quaint." Hayes kept her expression neutral, though her fingers tightened behind her back. "Time-tested reliability, Ambassador. Sometimes the old ways work best." The Centaurian made a sound like tinkling glass, their version of laughter. "Indeed, much like how some species still insist on walking when they could simply teleport." The other delegates chimed in with their own musical laughter, their crystalline forms pulsing with light. Hayes glanced at her helmsman, Lieutenant Sarah Cooper, whose knuckles had gone white on her control stick. The young officer had spent years mastering manual navigation, only to be treated like a child playing with toys. Through the bridge's panoramic windows, Hayes could see the Coalition's grand shipyard stretching into the distance. Vessels of every advanced species floated in their berths like exotic sea creatures. The Novarian dreadnoughts with their quantum bubble drives, the Lysithian cruisers wrapped in dark energy fields, and the Centaurians' own ships that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. And then there was the Tenacity. Her ship sat among them like a 20th century battleship at a luxury yacht show. The hull's dark metal plating and visible weapon ports marked her as what she was: humanity's first and only interstellar warship. No quantum fields, no dimensional phasing. Just good old-fashioned nuclear propulsion, kinetic weapons, and enough armor to make a rhinoceros jealous. "We really must be going," the lead delegate said, turning to Hayes with what passed for a sympathetic look. "The Coalition Defense Council is meeting to discuss your patrol assignment." Hayes nodded sharply. "Of course, Ambassador. I trust you found everything in order." "Oh yes, quite. Functional." The delegate's crystalline form sparkled with more suppressed laughter. "Though I might suggest studying some of our more advanced ship designs. For educational purposes, of course." The delegation glided toward the bridge exit, their bodies flowing around obstacles rather than walking. The lead delegate paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Captain, do try to keep your nuclear core contained. We wouldn't want any accidents in Coalition space." The door hissed shut behind them. Hayes waited 30 seconds before letting out a long breath. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" Lieutenant Cooper asked, her voice tight. "Granted." "Those crystal-plated suns off." "Easy, Lieutenant." Hayes moved to her command chair, running a hand along its worn leather arm. "They're just doing what everyone else does, underestimating us." Chief Engineer Jack Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, you might want to see this. They're announcing patrol assignments on the Coalition network." Hayes tapped her console, bringing up the display. Her jaw clenched as she read the assignment. Sector 847B, the absolute emptiest region of Coalition space, so far from any potential action that it might as well be a different galaxy. "They're grounding us without actually grounding us," Cooper said, disgust clear in her voice. Hayes stood, squaring her shoulders. "Lieutenant, plot a course for Sector 847B standard nuclear drive. No need to rush." She turned to address the bridge crew, seeing the same frustration and determination in every face. "They think we're obsolete. Fine. Let them think that. But I want every system checked, every weapon calibrated, and every crew member at their absolute best." "What are we preparing for, Captain?" Cooper asked. Hayes smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "For the day they realize that sometimes the old ways aren't just reliable, they're necessary. Morrison, begin those drive modifications we discussed." "Cooper, I want silent running drills every shift. Let's show them what this obsolete warship can really do." As her crew jumped to their tasks with renewed purpose, Hayes looked out at the gleaming Coalition ships. Soon enough, They'd learned that humanity's primitive technology had advantages they'd never considered. But for now, let them mock. Let them underestimate. The tenacity would be ready when it mattered. Lieutenant Marcus Flynn stared at his tactical display, then blinked and ran the scan again. The results remained the same. He turned to Chief Engineer Jack Morrison, who was elbow-deep in a disassembled railgun targeting system. "Run that test shot again," Flynn said, leaning forward in his station chair. "Something's not right here." Morrison wiped grease from his hands and adjusted the railgun's power settings. Firing test round in 3, 2, 1. The tenacity shuddered slightly as the weapon released a kinetic round into the asteroid field it'd been using for target practice. Flynn watched his displays intently, then broke into a wide grin. "Jack, look at this. The Coalition sensor buoy we passed. It didn't register the shot. Not even a blip." Morrison hurried over, his weathered face creasing in concentration as he studied the readout. "That's impossible. Those buoys can detect a solar flare from 3 systems away." He paused, then snapped his fingers. Unless what? They're so focused on energy weapons and quantum signatures, they never bothered to look for good old-fashioned metal slugs moving really, really fast. Captain Hayes entered the tactical room, catching the end of their conversation. "Explain." Morrison straightened up, excitement clear in his voice. "Captain, the Coalition's entire defensive network is built around detecting energy signatures, plasma weapons, quantum torpedoes, dark matter lances. But our railguns, they're just launching metal projectiles. Sophisticated ones, sure, but essentially just hunks of tungsten moving at ridiculous speeds. And their sensors aren't calibrated to detect that." Hayes finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. Flynn pulled up another display. "It's not just the weapons, Captain. Remember those strange readings we got during last week's silent running drill? I think our nuclear drive has the same advantage. When we're running on minimal power, their quantum scanners slide right past us. We read like space debris." Hayes leaned over the tactical station, studying the data. Around them, the tenacity cruised through the empty sector, her primitive systems humming steadily. "Morrison, how quickly can you modify our other railguns to exploit this?" The engineer grinned. "Give me 48 hours and a pot of coffee. I've got some ideas about using our electromagnetic signature to make us even harder to detect." "Make it happen." Hayes straightened up, her mind racing with possibilities. "Flynn, start running combat simulations. I want to know exactly what we can do with this advantage." "Already on it, Captain." Flynn's fingers flew over his console. "I'm thinking hit and run tactics. Silent approach using minimal power. Kinetic strike before they know we're there. Then disappear back into the void while their sensors are trying to figure out what hit them." Morrison nodded enthusiastically. "Like old submarine warfare, but in 3 dimensions. And speaking of submarines," he pulled up a schematic of the Tenacity's hull. "These armor plates we got mocked for. With some modifications, we could make them absorb sensor pings just like submarine acoustic tiles absorbed sonar." Hayes allowed herself a small smile. "They called us primitive. But they forgot that primitive doesn't mean simple. It means tested by time." The ship's intercom crackled. "Bridge to Captain Hayes. We're receiving a transmission from Coalition Command. On my way." Hayes turned to her officers. "Keep this quiet for now. I want this advantage fully developed before anyone realizes we have it." As she headed for the bridge, Hayes heard Morrison call out, "Oh, and Captain, I think I found a way to double our railgun velocity without increasing their energy signature. Want to see some Coalition officers' faces when their superior shields get penetrated by a primitive projectile." Hayes didn't turn around, but her smile widened. "Save that for when we really need it, Morrison. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you have." In the depths of space, the Tenacity continued her patrol, looking to all observers like an obsolete warship relegated to a backwater sector. But inside, her crew worked with renewed purpose, turning their ship's perceived weaknesses into strengths that would one day save the galaxy. They had found their edge. Now they just needed the right moment to use it. The Cygnus void stretched before the Tenacity like a black canvas painted with distant stars. Lieutenant Sarah Cooper adjusted their course, compensating for a strange gravitational disturbance that shouldn't have been there. "That's the third anomaly this week," she reported, frowning at her instruments. "Something's not right out here." Captain Hayes studied the sensor readouts from her command chair. The void had always been a mystery, a region of space where Coalition quantum sensors mysteriously failed. They claimed it was simply background radiation, not worth investigating. But Hayes had learned long ago that nature abhors a blind spot. "Morrison," she called over the intercom. "How are those modified sensors working?" The chief engineer's voice came back excited. "Captain, you need to see this. Our primitive electromagnetic scanners are picking up something the Coalition's quantum toys can't see." Hayes was already moving. "Cooper, maintain position. Flynn, you have the bridge." In the sensor lab, Morrison had transformed an entire wall into a display of overlapping readouts. Traditional radar, magnetic scanning, and heat detection, the old ways of seeing that humanity had perfected over centuries of space exploration. "Look here," Morrison pointed to a pattern of movement. "Regular pulses, like a heartbeat, but they're not natural." Hayes leaned closer. "Those patterns, they remind me of something." Her eyes widened. "Pull up the historical archives. 20th century submarine detection records." Morrison's fingers flew across the console. The ancient sonar patterns appeared alongside their current readings. The similarity was undeniable. "Someone's out there," Hayes said softly, "using the void's interference as cover, just like submarines used to hide in thermal layers." "But who?" Morrison asked. "The Coalition says they've mapped every spacefaring race in this sector." Hayes straightened up. "Prep a stealth shuttle. Minimal power signature, full electromagnetic dampening. I want to see what's hiding out there." "Captain," Morrison protested, "regulations require." "Regulations were written by people who think we're obsolete," Hayes cut him off. "Sometimes you need to bend the rules to prove them wrong." 3 hours later, Hayes piloted the modified shuttle deep into the void, with Morrison manning the sensors. They'd stripped out everything non-essential, running on backup power cells to maintain the lowest possible signature. "Contact," Morrison whispered, though there was no one to hear them in space. "Bearing 037, depth, my God." Hayes turned the shuttle slightly, and her breath caught. Through the viewport, barely visible against the backdrop of space, floated a vessel unlike anything she'd ever seen. Its hull seemed to bend light around it, making it almost impossible to focus on. But its size was unmistakable, at least 3 times larger than the biggest Coalition dreadnought. And it wasn't alone. As their sensors swept the area, more shapes emerged from the darkness. An entire fleet, hidden in plain sight, using technology that made the Coalition's finest ships look primitive by comparison. "Are you recording this?" Hayes asked, her voice tight. "Every bite," Morrison confirmed. "But Captain, look at their formation. The way they're positioned." Hayes saw it too, and her blood ran cold. It wasn't a defensive formation. It wasn't even an exploratory one. The fleet was arranged in classic attack positions, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. "Get us back to the ship," she ordered. "Now." As they turned to shuttle around, one of the alien vessels shifted slightly. Morrison's console lit up with warnings. "They're active," he hissed. "Some kind of scan." Hayes killed their already minimal power, letting the shuttle drift on its existing trajectory. For 10 heart-stopping seconds, they floated in absolute darkness. Then the alien scan passed over them, through them, and continued on. "They didn't see us," Morrison breathed. "Our power signature was too low." "No," Hayes corrected him as she carefully restored minimal power. "They saw us. They just didn't consider us a threat." Her jaw tightened. The same mistake everyone else makes. As they docked with the Tenacity, Hayes was already composing her report to Coalition Command. They wouldn't believe her, of course. But when the attack came, and it would come, humanity's obsolete warship would be ready. The only question was, would anyone listen before it was too late? The Coalition Grand Chamber sparkled with holographic displays and quantum interfaces. Captain Hayes stood at the center, her worn uniform a stark contrast to the ornate technological glamour surrounding her. The evidence from the Tenacity's reconnaissance played behind her, sensor readings, gravitational anomalies, and carefully measured patterns of movement. High Admiral Nexus of the Centaurian fleet let out a crystalline laugh that echoed through the chamber. Captain Hayes, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, these readings come from scanning equipment that was outdated before your species achieved spaceflight. With respect, Admiral, Hayes kept her voice level. Sometimes older technology sees what newer systems miss. The threat is real. The Lysithian representative, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate shell, pulsed with dismissive colors. Our quantum arrays cover every sector of Coalition space. They would have detected any significant fleet movements. Except in the Cygnus void, Hayes pressed, where your sensors don't work. A simple anomaly. The Novarian science director waved a tentacle dismissively. Random background radiation, nothing more. Hayes loaded another set of data. These movement patterns match classic military formations. The fleet we discovered is positioning itself for a major offensive. Impossible, High Admiral Nexus chimed. No known species could hide from our detection systems. No known species, Hayes emphasized. But what about unknown ones? The chamber erupted in overlapping voices and electromagnetic pulses of disagreement. Hayes stood her ground as the Coalition's most advanced races dismissed humanity's warning with technological certainty. Back aboard the Tenacity, Hayes found her crew already in motion. Morrison and his engineering team had converted Cargo Bay 3 into an ammunition manufacturing facility. The rhythmic thud of forging machines echoed through the halls as they produced specialized kinetic rounds. "They didn't believe you," Flynn said. It wasn't a question. No. Hayes watched as another batch of tungsten cores emerged from the fabricator. But they gave us permission to continue our patrol of the empty sector. Morrison looked up from his work, grease-stained and grinning. Perfect. That gives us time to implement the modifications we discussed. Hayes nodded. How long until we're ready? The new railgun configurations will be online in 48 hours. The silent running upgrades. Morrison consulted his tablet. Maybe a week. We're having to rebuild half the power distribution system to minimize our signature. What about the special project? Hayes asked quietly. Morrison glanced around before responding. The nuclear core modifications are ready. If we need to, we can channel everything into one massive burst. It'll fry the ship, but, he shrugged. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Hayes turned to Flynn. Status of the combat drills. The crew's getting better at operating with minimal power signatures. We can go from full silent running to combat power in under 30 seconds now. Still working on improving our targeting solutions for the new rounds Morrison's cooking up. Cooper's voice came over the intercom. Captain to the bridge. We're picking up unusual movements in the void. Hayes was moving before the announcement finished. On the bridge, Cooper's hands flew over her console, adjusting their position to maintain their sensor lock. Multiple contacts, Cooper reported. Similar signatures to what we saw before, but they're moving with purpose now. Formations tightening. Hayes studied the tactical display. The alien fleet was shifting, consolidating its positions. Preparing. Send another warning to Coalition Command, she ordered. The response came back almost immediately. UES Tenacity. Maintain your patrol route. Do not deviate. Coalition sensors show no anomalies in your sector. Hayes looked at her crew, saw the determination in their eyes. They all knew what was coming. The only question was when. Morrison, she called over the intercom. How much can you speed up those modifications? Already on it, Captain. We'll be ready. Hayes settled into her command chair, watching the distant movement of enemies only her ship could see. The Coalition wouldn't believe them until it was too late, but when that moment came, the tenacity would be ready. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The Coalition's annual fleet review should have been their proudest moment. Over 300 advanced warships arranged in perfect formation, their quantum drives and energy weapons humming with barely contained power. High Admiral Nexus's crystalline form gleamed as he prepared to address the assembled commanders. The tenacity watched from the very back of the formation, assigned to the least prestigious position possible. On her bridge, Captain Hayes gripped her armrests, eyes fixed on the sensor readings that only her ship could see. Multiple contacts, Flynn reported, his voice tight. Emerging from the void, they're accelerating. Coalition Command, this is UES Tenacity. Hayes broadcast on all frequencies. Unknown hostile fleet approaching at high speed. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not. The first strike came without warning. A wave of invisible energy swept through the Coalition formation. Advanced shields flickered and died. Quantum drives went dark. Sophisticated targeting systems became useless decorations. Coalition vessels, this is the Void Collective. A voice echoed through every ship's communications. It spoke in perfect Coalition standard, yet carried an undertone that made the crew's teeth ache. Your technological superiority ends today. The Tenacity's bridge crew watched in horror as the Coalition's mighty fleet descended into chaos. Ships fired blindly, their energy weapons passing harmlessly through the attackers' phase-shifted hulls. The Collective's return fire was devastating, each shot somehow bypassing the most advanced defensive systems ever created. Why aren't they targeting us? Cooper asked, hands steady on her controls despite the carnage around them. Because we're not worth their attention, Hayes answered, a grim smile forming. Morrison, status of our modifications. Ready, Captain. Running silent, kinetic weapons hot. They haven't even noticed our power signature. Hayes stood, her decision made. All hands, battle stations. Cooper, plot an attack vector. Flynn, load the special rounds. The Tenacity moved silently through the chaos, her nuclear drive running at minimal power. Around them, Coalition ships burned or drifted helpless. The Collective's vessels, strange geometries that hurt the eyes to look at, methodically destroyed the most advanced fleet ever assembled. Range to nearest target, Hayes asked. 2,000 kilometers, Flynn reported. Their shields are focused on energy weapons. They're not even looking for kinetic attacks. Fire when ready. The Tenacity's railguns spoke, specially modified tungsten rounds, accelerated to near-relativistic speeds, crossed the space in seconds. They struck the Collective vessel's phase-shifted hull and passed straight through their dimensional defenses. The enemy ship's strange geometry crumpled, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. For a moment, all battle seemed to pause. Multiple hostile contacts, Flynn called out. They're finally noticing us. Good. Hayes allowed herself a fierce grin. Cooper, evasive pattern delta. Morrison, give me everything you can on the silent running systems. Flynn, target their command ships. Let's show them what primitive technology can do. The Tenacity danced through the battlefield like a ghost. Her railguns spoke again and again, each shot finding its mark while the Collective's return fire passed through the space where they thought she would be. Coalition ships, those that still had power, watched in amazement as the obsolete warship struck back against an seemingly invincible enemy. Coalition vessels, Hayes broadcast, target their hull joints with physical weapons, missiles, projectiles, anything solid. Their phase shifting can't stop kinetic impacts. A few ships responded, those with backup ballistic systems or improvised weapons. Each hit weakened the Collective's vessels, proving they weren't invincible after all. Captain, Morrison's voice carried an edge of worry. We're running low on specialized rounds. Regular ammunition won't have the same effect. Hayes nodded grimly. Make every shot count. Flynn, prioritize targets. Cooper, keep us moving. They adapt quickly. We need to make these strikes matter. As the Tenacity continued her attack, a message cut through the chaos. High Admiral Nexus, his crystalline form damaged but intact, broadcast to all ships. All vessels, fall back to secondary positions. UEA's Tenacity. We were wrong about you. How can we assist? Hayes allowed herself a small smile as she responded. Follow our lead, Admiral. Sometimes the oldest solutions work best. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Void Collective had revealed itself, and humanity's obsolete warship had revealed their weakness. The Tenacity emerged from the nebulous purple haze like a predator from ancient seas. Her hull, scared from a dozen battles, reflected the distant starlight as she stalked her prey. On the bridge, Captain Hayes watched the tactical display where a Void Collective cruiser hunted for Coalition refugees. Range to target? She asked, voice quiet. 1,500 kilometers in closing. Flynn responded. They haven't detected us yet. Running silent is working perfectly. The past week had transformed the Tenacity from laughingstock to legend. While Coalition ships struggled to adapt, Hayes and her crew had turned their ship's limitations into a lethal advantage. Each victory taught them more about their enemy's weaknesses. Morrison, Hayes called over the intercom. Status of the new rounds. Ready, Captain. The engineer's voice carried a note of pride. These ones are special, designed to fragment after penetration. Should make quite a mess of their phase-shifted systems. Cooper's hands moved smoothly over her controls, guiding their ship through the debris field of a previous battle. In firing position in 30 seconds. Hayes studied the enemy vessel. The Collective had adapted quickly, adding new defenses after each encounter. But they still couldn't counter what they couldn't detect. Multiple emergency signals, Flynn reported suddenly. Civilian transport ships. The Collective is herding them toward their capture teams. Hayes's jaw tightened. How many civilians? Reading at least 300 life signs across 5 vessels. Cooper, new course. Take us between those transports and the enemy. The Tenacity pivoted gracefully, her nuclear drive barely registering on sensors. They'd perfected the art of silent running, moving through space like the submarines of old Earth. Enemy vessel adjusting course. Flynn warned. They're preparing to fire on the civilians. Not on our watch, Hayes said. Weapons free. Show them why you don't corner a human. The Tenacity's railguns spoke in harmony. Morrison's modified rounds streaked across space, their tungsten cores accelerated to speeds that made even light seem lazy. The first volley struck the Collective ship's aft section, shredding through their phase-shifted armor like paper. Direct hits, Flynn called out. Their primary systems are destabilizing. The enemy vessel turned, finally aware of the threat. Their return fire, designed to bypass energy shields, passed harmlessly through the space where they predicted the Tenacity would be. Cooper, attack pattern echo, Hayes ordered. Morrison, ready another volley. The Tenacity danced through space, each movement calculated to maximize the effectiveness of their kinetic weapons. The Collective ship's strange geometry began to break apart under the assault. Captain, Morrison's voice carried urgency. 2 more Collective vessels dropping out of phase space. Heavy cruiser class. Hayes allowed herself a grim smile. About time they started taking us seriously. Flynn, target solutions for both ships. Cooper, plot us a course through their firing lanes. Morrison, give them everything we've got. The Tenacity accelerated, her nuclear drive finally revealing their position. But by then it was too late for the enemy. The first cruiser took 3 rounds through its command section before it could raise defenses. The second managed to return fire, but their advanced targeting systems were designed for energy weapons and quantum signatures, not a ship running on technology they considered obsolete. Civilian ships are away, Flynn reported as their railguns claimed the second cruiser. Coalition fast response fleet incoming. 7 minutes out. Hayes nodded. Good. But we're not done yet. Morrison, status of the ammunition fabricators. Running at full capacity, Captain. But we're pushing the systems hard. Don't know how long they'll last. They'll last as long as we need them to, Hayes responded. Because right now, we're all that stands between the collective and total victory. Cooper, set course for the next target. Flynn, begin calculations for the next attack run. As the Tenacity moved deeper into contested space, her crew worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They had become hunters, protectors, the sword and shield of a coalition that had once mocked them. Let them mock now, Hayes thought. Sometimes the oldest weapons were the deadliest. Sometimes the simplest solutions worked best. And sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. Red emergency lights bathed the Tenacity's bridge in a crimson glow. Captain Hayes stood before her assembled senior staff, the ship's main display showing the approaching Void Collective Armada. Behind them, the remnants of the Coalition fleet regrouped, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. The modifications are ready, Morrison reported, his voice heavy with the weight of what they were about to attempt. We can channel the entire nuclear core's energy into one massive kinetic burst. The calculations are solid. And the cost? Hayes asked, though she already knew the answer. Total systems failure. We'll have exactly 47 minutes of emergency power before everything shuts down, including life support. Morrison met her gaze steadily. No way around it, Captain. This is a one-way trip. Lieutenant Cooper spoke up from her station. The Coalition's newest projections show the collective will break through their lines within 12 hours. After that, nothing stops them from taking every major system, unless we stop them first. Flynn pulled up a tactical display of the enemy fleet. Their command ship, that massive vessel at the center of their formation. If we can take it out, the entire invasion force loses cohesion, Hayes finished. Their phase shift technology requires synchronized control from their flagship. Without it, they're vulnerable. High Admiral Nexus's crystalline form shimmered on the main screen as the connection stabilized. Captain Hayes, the Coalition Council has reviewed your plan. We approve. Whatever resources you need are yours. Hayes nodded grimly. We need every remaining ship capable of firing kinetic weapons to mount a diversionary attack. Draw their defensive screen away from the command ship. Give us one clear shot. It will be done, Nexus promised. The Coalition owes humanity a debt we can never repay. We were blind to our own arrogance, and you showed us a better way. Save the speeches for after we win, Admiral. Hayes turned to her crew. This mission is volunteer only. Anyone who wants to transfer to the Coalition ships. Not a chance, Captain, Morrison interrupted. We started this together. We'll finish it together. The rest of the bridge crew nodded in agreement. Hayes felt a surge of pride. This was humanity at its finest, standing together in the face of impossible odds. Morrison, begin the core modifications. Cooper, plot us a course through their defensive screen. Flynn, I want our last rounds to count. Choose your targets carefully. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Coalition ships moved into position while the Tenacity's crew made their final preparations. Morrison's engineering team worked frantically to convert their nuclear core into the largest kinetic weapon ever created. Core modifications complete, Morrison reported from engineering. We're sitting on enough power to punch through a small moon. One shot, one chance. Hayes took her place in the command chair for what she knew would be the last time. All hands, battle stations. Cooper, take us in. The Tenacity moved through space like a ghost, all power diverted to their stealth systems. Around them, the Coalition fleet engaged the Collective's outer defenses. Energy weapons flashed uselessly through phase-shifted hulls. But here and there, kinetic impacts marked where humanity's primitive technology had taught their allies new tricks. Multiple contacts, Flynn warned. They're starting to adapt to our signature. Stay the course, Hayes ordered. Morrison, Begin power transfer to the main capacitors. The ship's lights dimmed as energy was diverted to their final weapon. Through the viewport, Hayes could see their target, the massive collective command ship that had orchestrated the invasion of Coalition space. Range to target, she asked. 8,000 kilometers in closing, Flynn reported. Their defensive screen is still up. Coalition fleet reports ready, Cooper added, waiting for our signal. Hayes took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything they'd learned, every battle they'd fought, had led to this. One final shot to prove that humanity's obsolete technology could save the galaxy. Send the signal, she ordered. All power to weapons. Let's show them what the last human warship can do. The Tenacity's nuclear core began to pulse with unprecedented power as they hurtled toward their destiny. They had one shot, one chance to end the war. It would have to be enough. The Tenacity streaked through space like a bullet fired from humanity's last gun. Her nuclear core blazed beyond all safety limits, pouring energy into the makeshift weapon that would determine the fate of the galaxy. On the bridge, bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting, Captain Hayes watched the distance to their target tick down. Coalition fleet engaging enemy screen, Flynn reported, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Multiple impacts. They're drawing their defenders away. Through the viewport, Hayes could see the massive form of the collective command ship. Its strange geometry seemed to twist reality itself, a monument to technological advancement gone too far. But they had found its weakness, the same weakness the Coalition had once mocked humanity for having. Core temperature critical, Morrison's voice crackled over failing speakers. We've got maybe 5 minutes before containment fails. That's all we need, Hayes responded. Cooper, status of approach vector. Threading the needle, Captain. Cooper's hands danced across her controls, guiding their final charge. Enemy point defense systems are tracking us, but their targeting is still calibrated for energy weapons. The ship shuddered as glancing hits struck their hull. The collective had finally learned to fear the primitive warship, but it was too late. The Tenacity had already sacrificed everything but her final punch. 3,000 kilometers, Flynn called out. Their phase shields are shifting to intercept. Hayes leaned forward in her command chair. Morrison, release final safeties. Give us everything. Aye, Captain. There was pride in the engineer's voice. It's been an honor. The Tenacity's nuclear core screamed as its full power was channeled into their last weapon. The specially modified railguns, pushed far beyond their design limits, began to glow with contained energy. Multiple enemy capitals moving to intercept, Flynn warned. They figured out what we're trying to do. Too late, Hayes smiled grimly. Cooper, execute final approach. All hands, brace for impact. The Tenacity fired. Every scrap of power, every ounce of energy their nuclear core could generate was converted into pure kinetic force. The modified tungsten round, accelerated to speeds that made light itself seem slow, crossed the final distance in a heartbeat. The collective command ship's phase shields, designed to stop energy weapons and quantum attacks, might as well have been tissue paper. The round struck their central control node with the force of a small sun, its specially designed fragments spreading through the massive vessel's internal structure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then reality seemed to twist as the command ship's phase shift technology failed catastrophically. The massive vessel began to break apart, its strange geometry collapsing in on itself as system after system failed. Direct hit. Flynn's triumphant cry was almost lost in the sound of their own systems failing. Their command network is collapsing. The entire fleet is losing phase coherence. Around them, collective ships began to flicker into normal space as their phase shift technology failed. Coalition vessels, now led by ships equipped with kinetic weapons, struck at suddenly vulnerable targets. All power lost, Morrison reported calmly. Emergency systems engage. 47 minutes of life support remaining. Hayes stood, facing her crew one last time. Send the final signal to the Coalition. Let them know it worked. Message sent, Cooper confirmed. Coalition fast response ships are already moving to retrieve us. They won't make it in time, Flynn said quietly. No, Hayes agreed. But that was never the point. Through the viewport, they could see the collective fleet breaking apart, their invincible armada reduced to scattered ships without their command network. The coalition forces, once helpless against their advanced technology, now struck with devastating effect. History books will remember this. Morrison's voice came over the failing comms. The day humanity's obsolete warship saved the galaxy. Hayes smiled, watching their victory unfold in the final minutes of their air supply. They'll remember more than that. They'll remember that sometimes the old ways are best, that being underestimated is an advantage, that humanity never backs down from a fight. The tenacity drifted, her power spent, her mission accomplished. She had started as a mockery, become a legend, and ended as humanity's greatest triumph. In the years to come, her story would be told in every corner of Coalition space. The ship that proved that sometimes the simplest solution is the strongest. The crew that turned limitation into advantage. The humans who saved the galaxy by refusing to admit defeat. In the end, they were mocked no more.